come take a look at this.
Mr. Daniels.
Mr. Daniels.
Look at this.
What's this?
The numbers, they keep getting bigger and bigger.
Clicks are off the charts.
Yeah.
Yoshi, it's Walter. We're back.
Yes, sir!
I need more trees. More trees? I'll get you more trees.
Hey, take a look at wood pulp.
Everything you got on wood pulp right now.
He really loves that thing.
All right. Hello, everyone. Now, hopefully you saw that intro video. It is a fantastic example of really good marketing, but also a really good example of data and the assumptions we make about data, sometimes the mistaken assumptions, before we really gather insights. Today, I want to introduce us. I guess we're talking about data and insights. So who loves data? Woo! Give it up, give it up. Okay.
That's it.
That's right, they should cheer. There's a lot of data here. But really, today we're gonna give you tactical advice for moving beyond those assumptions, looking at your data and gathering and putting together real insights. So who better to talk about that than Minna Wang, our product manager on the insights team at Degreed, who is also, clap, because she is amazing. And you'll clap even more knowing that Minna put together a spreadsheet of books and attributes about books, all to select the next book she should read, right? It doesn't get more data-oriented, data-driven than that, right? Except for maybe Mike Makis, who is our head of analytics and insights at Degreed. Clap for him too, because he'll feel bad. Who actually, for 13 years running, goes with a trip with his friends to an away game for Florida Gators football, and he tracks the win-loss and who was there and who wasn't. Also, he can get to who the real Lucky Charm is. Another great example of data-driven insights.
All right.
You can clap. If you're not a Gators fan, it's okay too. And I'm Eric Sharp. I'm the co-founder and now technology advisor at Degreed. And I deal with numbers too. I have 6 kids, right? Which basically adds up to 168 meals during a week and 60 to 120 homework assignments that we have to worry about, right? So that's my data. And today we're gonna jump in. First, let me jump to the next slide. And not that slide, we're gonna jump to this one. So the agenda. So first, Minna is gonna cover how to talk about data, right? Then where to start, because this is a massive thing. And then past that, Mike is going to talk about
data pipeline.
The data pipeline. Yes, it really is exciting, and he will make it exciting, the data pipeline. But then really to talk about the gathering insights spot that we talked about. So Minna, take it away.
Perfect. Thanks, Eric. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be up here talking to all of you today. So let's dive right in. The first thing that we wanted to do is make sure that all of us are on the same page when we talk about data. So there's a lot of terminology when it comes to data and data analytics, and sometimes these terms get used interchangeably. And so what we wanted to do first was just baseline and make sure that when we say these words that we're all talking about the same things. And there's a lot of terminology, but these are just some of the terms that we'll work on today. And we're all learning people here, and I'm a big fan, big believer in examples, and so with all of these, we'll go back to our favorite learning resource, the book, to give examples of all these. So the first term, starting with the basics, is just data. And data is a collection of a lot of information, so it's a lot of data points. So an example of a data point might be, the most expensive book that was ever sold was $30.8 million. It was, fun fact, it was actually a scientific notebook that Da Vinci wrote, and Bill Gates bought it, and then he turned it into a screensaver for one of the Windows OSs. And then, if you have a lot of data points, then that is what becomes data. Next is a KPI or a metric. So a KPI is really just a type of metric. It's one that's so important to your business that it's something that you track over time and that you want to benchmark against. And KPI just stands for Key Performance Indicator. And so an example of a KPI or a metric that you might track if you're reading might be the pages that you're reading per month or the number of times that you've opened your Audible app in the last year. Next is dashboard. So a dashboard is just a collection of visuals that can be used together to tell a story. So that might be like a couple of KPIs and then a few graphs that matter to you. And the goal is to, at a quick glance, have everything that you need to get a quick overview of the story or the part of the business that you're interested in. And so if what I care about is how much I've been reading, then maybe I have a KPI on my dashboard for the number of books I've read in the last month, and then I also have a bar chart of the number of pages that I've read each day over the past month, and then a table of the books that I've read and what genres they're in. And a dashboard is often confused with a report. These are one of those terms that we use interchangeably. A report is different than a dashboard in that it dives into a specific piece of the data, and it's more focused on giving you that raw data, so the numbers that are behind a visual. And analytics are what you get when you dive into a report. So when you create a graph or when you've really done some statistical analysis on a report. So for example, an analytic might be that I dive into my Kindle app and I see that I read double the number of pages in August than I did in September. And insights are the next level up on analytics. So insights I think of them as analytics made actionable, and you get to them by asking yourself why. And so the example that I gave for analytics, the double the number of pages in August versus September, that's not really actionable. But if my goal is to read more, then I can make it actionable by asking myself, well, why did I read more pages? I can dive into the data, and maybe I read more in August because I was reading a fiction book, whereas in September, I was reading a business book. So that tells me that if I want to read more, I either need to read more fiction or find some more exciting business books. All right, and for these last couple terms, I wanted to focus on ones that have become really prevalent in our industry, but are still a little bit murky. So data science and machine learning, this is really when you can match statistical knowledge with programming power. And you're really driving at pattern recognition or making predictions. And so some examples of data science or machine learning that could be applied are with data science, maybe you're trying to predict the number of fiction bestsellers that are going to be written in the next year. Or a machine learning example that might be, I take the first 2 chapters of 1984 and I put them into an algorithm, and that algorithm spits me back out what it would write as the 3rd chapter of 1984. And finally, we have artificial intelligence. And I think of artificial intelligence as kind of machine learning on steroids, to the point where it replaces something that a human might be able to do. So an example of AI might be a model or a product where I just type in the words dystopian future, and it spits me out a novel. All right, so hopefully that helps get all of us on the same page, and as we go through the rest of the presentation and use some of these terms, it'll be easier to understand what we're talking about. And the other reason, again, that I wanted to mention these is because a lot of these are used interchangeably, and sometimes they're not. So for example, if I need a dashboard, but I ask someone that I work with for a report, that can be really confusing. And so for us to be able to use the right terms, the terms that we mean when we ask for something, then that helps keep all of us on the same page, and then also educate our teams and just elevate data literacy in all of our organizations. So with that out of the way, let's get to the good stuff. So where to start, when you start analyzing data and when you start trying to get insights out of it. And I wanted to start this with a story. So this is Sarah, and Sarah works in learning and development. And she hasn't done a lot with data in the past, but she's really excited to get started. And she finally has some capacity to. Her executives, her boss is really behind it now. And so now she's trying to figure out how to begin. And she's heard this term data exploration a lot. And so she just thinks, well, that's great. I'll just go in, I'll start exploring my data to figure out how to work with it. And this is what happens. So first, she gets a spreadsheet. Maybe this is a data feed or a data export from her LMS or her LXP. Maybe she's using Degreed. And Sarah hasn't used Excel in a while, but she's like, I can figure this out. And then she realizes there are half a dozen reports just like it. And to get a good view of what's happening, she actually has to somehow mesh all of those together. And she's starting to feel a little bit overwhelmed, but she's like, I'm going to keep going. So she decides to just pick one and go with it. And she wants to start analyzing it, so she creates a graph in Excel. And it turns out that's really easy to do. All you have to do in Excel is you select some columns and then click on a chart type, and it gives you a chart. The thing is, it's so easy, it's maybe too easy, because before Sarah knows it, she's got a lot of charts. And she doesn't know what all these mean, but they look pretty sweet, right? Like a radar chart, she's got a Nautilus graph that she's never heard of before. But the problem is she's looking at these and she doesn't know what insights she's supposed to pull out of them. She doesn't know what problems these are solving, what questions they're supposed to answer for her. And then she's at lunch one day and she's talking to someone and she's like, yeah, I'm using these reports. And they stop her and they're like, whoa, reports? Why aren't you using our API? And she doesn't know what an API is, but she's like, I'm too embarrassed to say anything, so I'll just go with it. And then she gets back to her desk after lunch. And in her inbox, she has invites to licenses for Domo and Tableau, and she logs in, and there's more charts, chart types that she's never seen before. And it's just so overwhelming, and she doesn't know, again, what problems that these charts are supposed to solve or answer for her, and she gets so frustrated that she just gives up. And I want to tell this story to say that data exploration is a really, really wonderful thing. And it's a great way to work with data if data is your whole job, or if you already know kind of the ins and outs of what you're doing and you're just trying to learn the data that you have. But if your job is using data to support the decision making that you're doing, you have to be really targeted about how you spend your time when you work with data. And especially if you're trying to learn data analysis at the same time that you're learning about the data that you have, it can be overwhelming to try and do both of those at the same time. And so what I want to offer are some ideas on how to get started without doing the very broad and general data exploration. I'll start with this quote from Albert Einstein, and he says, "If I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on the solution, I would spend the first 55 minutes determining the proper question to ask." And the rest of this quote is Einstein saying, because I'm a genius, so I could solve any problem that you throw at me in 5 minutes. And that's maybe not the case for all of us, but I think this goes to show it's so important to define the problem that you're trying to solve before you get started on tackling it. And that's why I think, when we work with data, we should do the same thing. We should start with a problem. And for me as a product manager, I spend all day thinking about problems and how we solve them. So I wanted to share 2 methods from product management on how to start with problems, and then also share an example of how you can use those 2 methods together to tackle analysis. So the first method is called job stories, and this comes from a company called Intercom. Job stories are based on jobs to be done from Clayton Christensen, if any of you have heard that famous milkshake example that he has. And a job story is pretty simple. It's just in a sentence form. the problem that you're trying to solve. And so you identify the situation, your goal or your motivation, and your desired outcome after you're able to solve that problem. I'm going over this pretty quick right now, but I'll go into an example that hopefully makes this really clear. And then the second method is called working backwards, and this was pioneered by Amazon. And what working backwards means is taking the end deliverable that you want and then going back step by step to figure out how you get there. So in Amazon, how they use this with product is before they launch a new product or even start developing a new feature, they'll write the press release for that before they start working on it. All right, and so for the example, we're going to go back to Sarah. So Sarah's problem that she's trying to solve, as she's writing her job story, hopefully this is something similar that all of you have run into as well. She says, this is her situation, when she's at the end of a quarter, she wants to know the most popular providers in her organization so that, this is her desired outcome, so that she can allocate more budget towards them. And so now that she has her job story defined, she can start working backwards from that to figure out what data she needs to support that and how she can get that data. And so the first question that she asks herself is, what deliverable do I want? And so for Sarah, with this job story, she might say, well, I just want a list. Like, all I need is the list of providers and, ranked by how popular they are. Or maybe if she needs to, show that to her boss or get approval from somebody else, maybe she wants that to be a really pretty graph that she can put in a slide deck. And next is, what data do I need to be able to support that deliverable? So in Sarah's case, it's pretty simple. The data points that she needs are the content that's being completed, so content pieces, how often they're being completed, and then the providers for those content pieces. Next is, who or where can I get that data from? So if Sarah were using Degreed, she would be able to get all of that from Degreed's API or standard reports, depending on where Sarah works. Maybe she has to go to 2 different sources for those 2 different pieces of information. And then maybe she goes directly to the vendor, or maybe she has someone on her team internally who does analytics, who'd be able to help her round all that up. And finally, what form do I need that data in? So if Sarah is really comfortable with Excel, maybe she got past her fear of charts, and now she's really comfortable with it, so maybe she wants it in Excel, or maybe she has fallen in love with Tableau, and she wants all the data there. And so this way she can go to whoever she talks to and say, and she's able to say, like, this is the form that I would like to have this data in. So in summary, these are the 4 questions for working backwards that you can ask yourself as you're going along and trying to figure out how to get the data that you need to solve these problems. And Mike, in the second half of his piece, will actually pick this up and talk about, once you have that data, how you start pulling insights out of it. So now I'll pass the time over to Mike to talk about data pipeline and insights. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Minna. As I said, I'm Mike Makis. I lead our internal analytics and insights function. So I get to work with a lot of the fun stuff you saw this morning, like Chris McCarthy showed with all of your skills data. Minna helped tell you where to start and kind of bring you through like asking the right question. I'll finish, as she said, with drilling into some insights, giving you some examples. Right now, I'll take you through work with your data pipeline, kind of more of the technology part. So some of you might remember a computer game called Pipe Dream. If you don't, it's okay. I'll explain it really quick and you'll totally understand. So with Pipe Dream, you take a puzzle of different pipe pieces, and the goal was to get the pipe to all connect so you can get the fluid to go from the source to the end, right? And so that's what you need to do with data, right? You need to often get it from one place and then end up telling a story in the end. So many of you are already working with data every day, all day. You have people working on your team on this. It might look something like this. You have some type of source system, source data. In our case, you might be working with us at Degreed. You might be working with some LMS vendor or similar. you're all probably doing some level of an export, setting up some kind of recurring feed, putting it into like a workbook or a database. And then ultimately, you're trying to put together some charts, tell your story, talk to your stakeholders, and impress your boss. Right? Can all relate. We're all doing this. And then over time, you do more things. You start to join it to other data sets, maybe like HR data. Start to tell a different and better story. You join it to maybe people's, where they're from in their region, or maybe their department, or their manager when they started. And start to tell an extended story, more advanced. But over time, I've talked to a few of you already this morning, more probably later, and then tomorrow. Over time, this gets a little repetitive. It gets hard. You need people to continue to export things and keep the system going. So what's kind of the next step? So my goal is to kind of help shape this for you, so you can start to see the puzzle pieces of kind of carving your own roadmap of what this might look like for you. And so this is probably a next step that either some of you are in, or maybe you're considering, or you're already talking to some of us about. So you're still working with the same source data. You still have this goal to work with a bunch of internal data sets. And now you probably might think some more advanced things to work with some third-party data, maybe this CRM system, or maybe this customer support system to get more pieces of the puzzle. And then now, in order to, you're trying to do better visualizations, you're trying to automate these things and make them more dynamic. So you're looking at some type of business intelligence tool. How can I kind of automate and make this happen? And in order to do that, you kind of have to change the model a little bit, right? Instead of exporting and dumping into somebody's Excel sheet on the SharePoint drive or some type of Access database, you have to start looking at a different option like a data warehouse. But the same process is still there. You're still trying to get to the end to put together charts and maybe a dashboard, tell your story, help your stakeholders, help your sponsor. Long game, once you get millions of rows of data, you start to get a lot more sophisticated. You want to get some kind of predictions going. You'll start to look at other tools like Minna helped with, all the stuff you see in the market, all the buzzword bingo, AI, ML, all this good stuff. Different tools, different programming languages. This is where you might maybe start to fit it in. But overall, I wanted to just paint the picture for all these things. In the end, you'll probably be doing a combination of all of them, right? You're not going to replace. But I wanted to help take the story of like where to start with the data, the insights we'll go to next, but to help you work with your team and your leadership of the roadmap that's ahead of you. The common questions we get pulled into are, what BI tool should I buy? Or what data warehouse? The answer is it's unique for all of you, depending on kind of how your business functions, the strategy, and the goals you're trying to solve. So we can sometimes help with asking the right questions, but I wanted to take you through the kind of the puzzle so you can help form the right roadmap to set expectations with your team and with your boss. Then the next part, the last part for us, is gathering insights, kind of the whole title of the session, taking data, taking numbers, turning them into insights. So I want to take you through a really basic example of how you could work with some data to drill in and get some insights. So I think probably all of you will relate to this example. It's a pretty basic one, but hopefully it gives you some techniques to go through it. So as Minna was saying, figure out where to start. So maybe your question is our organization course heavy? Are we focused a lot on formal learning, and digging into the data so you figure out if you know and what can you do? So you form a hypothesis, right? The hypothesis, we do have a high percentage of courses versus these other types, right? Probably sounds a little bit familiar with some of you. You look into the data, you at first glance, you take a whole year cut. This is what it looks like. So you may not see some of the fine print, but I'll tell you, the top is a lot of courses, got a little bit of books, a little bit of articles, a little bit of videos, right? Seems really course heavy. Okay, so is that really us? You looking in the mirror? So I want you to look at it a different way. Part of going through this insights discussion and talking through it is, how else could we look at it? How else could we observe this? So let's take this data and then spread it across the year and look at it over time, right? And it starts to look a lot different. So if we take that same content completions data that you looked at and you spread it out, and this is actually real data and it's paired off and real stuff. So you look at like week 3 or week 37 there, you see a little bit of a spike. I don't know what was happening there. Week 48, you see this huge spike. And you ask the people on your team, you ask your analysts, you ask, what happened that week? I don't remember. What was going on? There's probably a good reason. Maybe it was some LMS load, or maybe some big announcement on compliance or something. And then the other one was maybe we had a batch of new hires. So let's kind of look at those a little bit of an exception in kind of the pattern we're seeing. Let's look at just maybe the last 13 weeks, right? 13 and a quarter. Let's just look at the last bit. So we filter it down and we start to look just for the last 13. It starts to look a little bit different, right? You can still see a lot of the courses here in green, but there's now a much healthier mix. So is this us? Was the first case us where it was really course heavy? Or is this closer to us? Now you're not really sure. So let's look at it again a different way. Who's doing this? We always, with the data, need to kind of look at the context of what's behind it. We're always looking at these charts or tables or data points, but ultimately these are people, right? They're doing things. And so let's look at who was active during the same cycle. So same time period, and we look at the users. And on the bottom here in the blue, I've pulled the same data, but looked at the brand new people that came in the first time. And then in the green on this area chart in the back was everybody all together that's repeat users and new. And so again, you start to see part of a different story, but it's the same bigger story, the bigger context, all these people doing this. And so now let's look at this again in maybe two different parts. Let's look over towards the left where it's a little interesting. You see the little spike there. It looks like probably a new hire week maybe, or a big communication to get people to use the new tool that we know we sent out. There's a little second one there. So let's look at that first week, and then after that, we'll look at one of these last weeks. And so what do you see? You see that peak there where all these new users came in, see a lot of courses again. So it's kind of similar to that first story. Maybe the hypothesis is we do a lot of courses here. You see these other article video types, they're there, but the course one's still that dominant one. So we kind of are confirming in that batch with the new hires, probably doing a lot of courses. And then you look further along that timeline I gave you, and you look, it's really different. Look at the difference. And you see now when it's not as many new hires, you see all this video concentration, these articles. Courses is there, but now it's a third, and it's not this 80, 90% you saw before. So you start to see a different story. So the point of looking at all these is that if you dig different ways, slice different ways, you start to gather different insights, maybe surprises, maybe some things you're confirming. So from our initial hypothesis where we thought maybe we're pretty heavy on courses, what we learned is that once we filter out some of the noise, in those big weeks where we loaded things, or there was a bulk load, or there was a bunch of new users, it starts to look pretty normal. We confirmed the spikes with new users do have a lot of courses, so maybe that's involved with some onboarding. But we did also find that in these regular weeks where there's not as many new people coming in, we definitely have a more balanced mix. And so is this enough to kind of go present to somebody? Probably not. But you learned new places to start looking. And so the next thing I'd say from here, if you were going through this or I was helping, maybe look more at the repeat cycles of a few different weeks and what does it look like, and kind of then understand our pattern. And then much further down the road, if you wanted to get predictive and see kind of what's in the future, you could look at applying like some statistical modeling or different language or maybe some kind of machine learning app to kind of figure out what's next. So hopefully with the examples I gave here in the insights, you can have a few different tips to kind of dig into things differently. So I'll let Eric kind of wrap us up and finish with some key takeaways.
Thanks, Mike. So these takeaways may be just unique to each of you. You're all in different situations inside of your companies and what you're doing with data and insights. So please write down if you've got any questions in a few minutes. We'll actually open it up for questions that you might have, as well as if we run out of time, you can go next door. Mike and Minna have been manning the booth over there for data and insights. So make sure you go visit them. So today we talked about the why, the what, right? Asking the question of what are we really trying to get to here, right? That Adobe ad at the beginning is a classic example of not asking that question. I think the numbers can look the way you want them to, right? If you stare hard enough, that's kind of what I'd say. So don't do that. Find out what the problem is. What is the decision you're trying to support, like Minna talked about. Next, lead by example. I think define the terms up front for your team and make sure that you're using those in your conversations so that everybody's on the same page and that you get the assumptions out there. It'll help clarify your goal and help you achieve that, right? The next one, I'm actually going to take just a minute and tell a. Oh, thanks. I thought you hit next slide. I'll blame Mike. I blame him for everything. He's the scapegoat. So here's the real takeaways. So next, I actually just want to share a story. Like I mentioned, I'm the co-founder of Degreed. David approached me, it's been 7.5, almost 8 years ago, with this crazy idea that was all about impacting change in the world for people. And so for me, I grew up in the middle of nowhere, in a mobile home, without running water part of the time. There was no reason to expect me to do anything from that environment. All of my friends were hoping for the next oil boom, the next job as a mechanic, maybe graduate high school. But I was fortunate in some ways. My dad worked at a mine. He got laid off from that mine, and my mom decided to go back to school to be a teacher. And that hinge point, she started teaching me, and I started getting extra curious with the world, with astronomy, with geology, with reading our home encyclopedia page by page, just because I soaked up and I was extra curious about the learning. Fast forward, I taught myself programming. I got into college degrees and graduate degrees, all because I just loved learning and soaking that up. So when Dave talked to me about Degreed, it rang true. And what I want to pull out of this today is that it's really easy to overlook the data, the insights that you're drawing, and overlook those people, but really you have the opportunity to impact real lives, and that is amazing. And so you should use the data and draw the right insights to get them there. And I think all of you are passionate about people and skills and building those skills, but that's really what it means. It means the difference for somebody like me coming from the environment I did and being able to pick up skills and grow in that way. So don't forget the people. And that was a long-winded say to remember that key takeaway. And then lastly, enjoy the journey. It really is your own skill building that is taking place as you go through this process. And that's okay. You don't know everything, ask the right questions and connect with the right people, but enjoy that journey because you are building those skills as you go along and work with this data and with the insights. So next, we're gonna just spend a few minutes with any questions that you have. I don't know how we're running mics or if we can yell it out. Oh, there's somebody in the back. I see somebody, okay, 2 people waving mics. So feel free to stand up if you have a question and they'll bring you a mic and we'll all answer those questions for you.
I started about the one about like which technology, and we could talk about some that we've all used, but ultimately I was saying during my part of the presentation is you got to kind of evaluate the ones that are going to work for you. There's not really a silver bullet out there. You got to kind of look through like what are all the pieces to the puzzle you got to work on. So the common thing people will ask us is, can we use this tool, or do you recommend this one? And sure, we've all used different ones, and we like this one, but ultimately, you got to find what kind of works for your organization, meets your strategy. So that would be one that I'd say is pretty popular.
Yeah, I think one that I very commonly get asked is, how can we as an organization focus on learning metrics that aren't just engagement-based? Because just engagement, just like content completions and things like that, I think someone once used the term with me, they called them leaky, because people can complete content and mark content complete, but add content and read content, but it actually doesn't add to the skills that they're building. And maybe they watched the video, they read the article, but they actually forget everything that it taught them maybe a week later. And so some of the other ways that you can look at skill data that might be more useful is, or learning data, excuse me. One of the things that I really like are ratios. So being able to look not just at completions, but maybe it's logins versus completions. So on average, how many logins does it take before someone completes something? Or depending on kind of where your organization is, if you started looking into skills data, being able to use that as a way to track the progress of learning and how much learning retention is happening.
I have a question over here.
Yeah.
There's a tension between using data to really serve the learners in our organizations and then kind of crossing over to the creepy side where maybe you're making predictions and showing them things that that the machine learning says that, okay, they might be interested. How are there factors that we can that we should be considering as we are navigating this? So whether it's aggregation or anonymizing, what are the things that we should be thinking about as we're looking at using data in our organizations to strike that balance?
Yeah, I can
Give it the first shot.
Yeah, I'll take a first pass at it. You guys can fill in the blanks. Yeah, I think that's a great question. There's, whenever it comes to data, there's also this consideration of how do we not make it Big Brother, right? And how do we not go off into the negative side where, if somebody's learning about something that maybe isn't part of their job, because at the end of the day, data is a tool, and we as the humans who look at it get to decide if it's used for good or for evil. And so I think one of the ways to keep data from maybe being creepy or being used for potentially negative applications are look at trends rather than individuals. So you can scrub the data so that people's names aren't tied to the content that's being viewed or the content that's being completed. Instead, you can look at the topics that are maybe most popular. And so that's one way to kind of distance yourself so that individuals can't be approached based on the content they're completing or the content that they're looking at.
And I would add I think I was speaking in EdTech Europe, so across the pond. One of the things that came up was we've got this new generation of so much data and so many ways to use it, but the topic was around bias inside of that data and inside of our system. So that's another thing I'd watch out for is sometimes that history and what has happened we think is a great predictor of the future and kind of predicting what content or what skills or anything we give to somebody specifically, but sometimes that may not fit the best purpose. I know at Degreed we've built our technology team from the get-go. We've always tried to keep it gender balanced and make sure that we have diverse minds to really put good solutions against these difficult problems. And if we were looking at it and had a lot of data, there are definitely some roles that we would never ever recommend for, say a female engineer, right? Because historically they've been underrepresented in that role, right? And that's not acceptable to us. So just question some of that data and question some of the bias you might have with the data or that the historical context is bringing in. And I think it'll put you in a better spot to really lead the charge with change in your organization. Okay, any other questions?
I have one over here. What would you say is maybe the biggest misstep that people make or have when gathering and interpreting data?
I'll start. I think kind of on the theme of the misstep, and not necessarily on the pinpoint of the question, but is a lot of us try and tackle so much where it's just boil down an individual question. I think Eric's explained it to me well in the past. It's it's kind of like a layer cake. There's all these things to work on and kind of start to answer, but if you pinpoint what's the exact question, how well can we answer it, and then iterate from there, I'd say that's how I'd start to answer of, one thing we could probably all do better, just attacking the individual tight question.
Yeah, and really that means looking at it like a startup, right? That's probably what I'd say. It's iterative. It's not going to be perfect from the get-go, and be okay with that, because you'll find that sometimes the data will lead you to the right place. Know the right time to dive into data exploration, as Minna talked about, but make sure that you're not trying to make the data pipeline perfect for everything when you can start with rough surveys or rough data that's coming in. That can lead you to interesting insights that lead you to ask other questions that lead you to the right spot. So just make sure perfect's not the enemy of good.
Yeah, I think what I would say is this kind of goes with the job story example that I gave. I know sometimes I will get a question in my head or an idea of, this would be so interesting to know, and then I spend a lot of time researching that, and then I get to the end of it and realize it actually doesn't drive a decision for me, or it's not actionable for me. And so that's why I try to adhere to the job stories to figure out, like, is this going to change my mind on something or change how I do things? And if so, then it's a good line of inquiry to pursue. If I'm just curious, then maybe it's not worth my time right now, or maybe I should write it down and save it for later when it can actually change a decision that I'm about to make.
So we probably have time for one more quick question. Anybody?
I have a two-part question. So the first one, what are some of your lessons learned as you put these insights together? So the second part, what are some of the best practices that you could share with us?
Say that last sentence again.
The best practices that you could share with us.
The best practices on the beginning part was like starting with the data, or?
Yeah, lessons that we've learned.
Lessons learned. I think some of the things we just said were the things I'd echo and repeat, is that like with what Minna said of how many times in a role like ours I get asked like at least 3 to 5 times a day, or 10 times a week, for give me this report or give me this dashboard, can you give me an answer to this? But I would repeat what Minna just said, and it's almost going back to them. How is this going to help your business? What are you going to change? What are you going to do differently? And if they're not, let's drill into the question and like re-ask it. I'd say that's the top one, is to figure out like what's really behind this. What are we really going to change? Are people just curious, and kind of let's look at something bigger?
Yeah, I'd say one of the lessons that I've learned is, so I come from a technical background. I studied biomedical engineering in school, and so I'm really used to writing, scientific papers. And in scientific papers, you always talk about your methods and your hypothesis, and it's only at the very, very end where you talk about your conclusions and actually make them clear to everyone. And that's very different to, I think, how businesses work, where a lot of times people don't. They're trusting you to have done the analysis. They're trusting your methods. They just want to know the conclusions. And so when you're showing data or presenting a graph, you really want to make it front and center, the takeaway that you got from it and that you want others to get from it, because otherwise you might spend 10 minutes like having them puzzle through the graph. And so making sure that you communicate what you got from your analysis, and yeah, making that front and center.
Perfect. Thank you. Great questions. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for attending all these sessions. I appreciate it.
Yeah, come visit us at the Cactus Lounge. Thanks, everyone.